I kind of wished that this tier list didn't exist in many ways, because there are definitely going to be a lot of people who look at this list and like, oh wow, my class sucks, right? But the thing is, I think like while people talk about ceilings on like a normal tier list, right? When they place classes on a tier list and they're like, oh, the ceiling of this class is higher than this one. I think like and many times those people are thinking about ceilings, not even like Trixion ceilings. They're thinking about average raid ceilings. And like this one is purely Trixion ceilings, which certain classes, again, do. While Trixion is a stationary dummy, there are still certain classes that do better than Trixion than other classes.
Alright, so in the last month, we've had two different sources of data that have kind of grabbed the attention of the community. Well, one more so than the other. But I want to talk about them both because they're both in a similar vein as something I've been meaning to talk about once again, which it's tier list. You know, we're 4 months into 2024 and I really haven't made a video talking about tier lists, and that's, you know, as a content creator, that's kind of sus. Everybody loves tier lists, everybody talks about them.
True.
Like, it's at this point where people kind of have a quote on that shit. But my thing is, I think tier list data, they're cool, they're good information, I think they're interesting, but I don't think they should be something that you decide your choices on. Especially in a game like Lost Ark. There is an argument for competitive games where that could be a thing. Like if you're playing Tekken and two players are at the exact same skill level, the character with the better damage, the better frame data, that's going to give them the advantage, that's going to give them the edge. But because this is an MMO, this is a game with gear, there are a lot more things to consider besides player and character ceiling. And the fact that this is a PvE game as opposed to a PvP game, well there's PvP but nobody really cares about it. But it changes the whole dynamic because there is no matchup. So the first one is pretty simple. It's not something we're going to spend a lot of time on because it's very basic and very to the point. This is a damage tier list on the rawest of forms. This is just showing how much damage these characters can do.
Find the original screenshot of it, so rip the quality. Bottom tier is like not sure if we can even kill the Trixion Dominic. Yeah, I remember this one. Which I don't know. Since tier list, these tier lists have kind of been like very this is just like a Trixion tier list. So it is what it is. It doesn't actually mean anything about raid performance. Which, again, I feel like in this tier list, the Deadeye, enhanced weapon Deadeye should definitely be like much higher. So it has to do with like the Trixion Parse, which Deadeye just doesn't have a very high one.
In a Trixion Parse. So this is just every engraving's damage ceiling, and nothing is really too surprising. Most of everything is where most people would expect, but you have to remember this is like a 2-minute vacuum, perfect uptime, everything. These are ceilings and not really practical. And I think that's really all that needs to be said about this, because we're going to get into all these kind of details into the next one, which is the more prevalent topic, which is the Lost Ark DPS visualization. So if you don't know, which you probably do because you probably watch other Lost Ark creators and everybody's already made a video on this, there is now a log website where people upload their logs, and there are thousands and thousands of logs. So since people have access to all this information now, people have decided to put these all together and compare them. But to put it in these visualizations to help really make this more digestible than just looking through a bunch of logs. And I think what's really interesting about this situation is this is like really the first time that a lot of KR people are looking to NA for information. Now, I could be wrong about that, but my first exposure to this was an Inven post that was showing them looking at our logs to put together a graph similar to this. Because in KR, it is a very bannable offense. Using meter over there is not allowed, while over here in the West, it's kind of the Wild West. We don't talk about it, and people generally don't seem to get banned for it, but so it's just kind of a don't ask, don't tell situation.
So log is basically accepted, right? What do you mean logs? Like that website? Or are you saying like just like getting DPS meter? I think like there's nothing illegal about using the logs website. Like taking a look at the logs website and using that information, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it is definitely data that is gotten through illegal means, technically, like, you know, illegal quote unquote, because it technically is against TOS to use meter and whatever. But I don't think that using the data there and just looking at it is like you're not doing anything wrong. I think it's accepting. Using log while playing, I mean, for us, like, it's not allowed, but I mean, AGS just kind of turns their blind eye on it, right? If nobody is policing it, it's basically allowed. But, you know, with Theamine the First, that's a different story, right? I don't know how they're going to be able to test whether or not we have used a meter in our runs, but they say they're going to try to test for it, so they have come out with a stance on it for Theamine the First specifically, and said that's not allowed. Didn't the director say they won't ban people from using logs in the YouTube live stream? No, they never said that. I'm pretty sure they said they will. Because Sierra Inman was talking about it, just like telling them we know it's in discussion recently. Reminder, we banned for it. Yeah, it's definitely not allowed in KR for sure. I mean, it's not allowed here either, but I mean, people still use it. People still do it because people don't enforce it, right? It's kind of like RMTing, right? It's like if you have the list of like bad things in Lost Ark, in terms of like punishments, right? Of course, the highest punishment, I don't even know what the highest punishment would be, like the worst thing to do in a Lost Ark. Maybe just like hacking, right? Straight up hacking. I think that's like the most bannable offense. And then like RMTing is like a step down where it's like some people get banned, some people don't. And like, you know, and like peer-to-peer RMT is pretty much not bannable. Like nobody can detect for it, right? So nobody really gets banned for it, but some people get banned for like RMT for bots. Not everybody does. Then you have like meter, which like nobody gets banned for it. It's kind of like a spectrum, right? They're all things that you can't do in the game, but you know, one is like very bannable, and the bottom one is like pretty much nobody can detect it and nobody bans it. Just because it's not like Final Fantasy, you get banned for just talking about it. It's TOS, but they're not enforcing it. Yeah, exactly. So ban for being toxic with it on, but if you don't say anything, they ignore it. Have there been people who got banned for meter for being toxic? Like I know that they'll ban toxic people, right? If they're being too toxic, but actually, you know, I think I've seen a Reddit post about this, about some people getting banned for like calling people out on meter. So yeah, I think they have done that in the past.
So this is all data and parses from the West. Yeah, so if we take a look, there is the fight and the item level up on top, and then on the left side is every engraving. The number beside it is the amount of parses that it was able to draw that data from. Since this is just taking data off the logs.
Yeah, hard to convert it with meter. Yeah, for sure. I think like a lot of people who said they have been banned for meter, a lot of times have done other things outside of just using meter. They've done other things that they could have gotten banned for. What are those numbers and lines? So basically what this is these numbers over here are the number of people that have data. The number of data points, right, are these numbers. These lines are basically where they parsed. These above the lines over here on the right side are people who parsed above average. The people on the left right here are people who parsed below average. And then all these dots are outliers, basically. People who parsed way above the norm or way below the norm.
There isn't like a set number for each one. They didn't limit it, or they didn't try to get a certain bare minimum. This is just, hey, we had this many logs, here's all the data. And also in this data, they did disregard multiple parses from the same person on the same fight. I'm pretty sure they said that somewhere. So there is a whole lot of data to unpack and extract from all this. It is super interesting to me because this is actual real data. Because the thing is, the reason why I don't like making tier lists, and the reason why I always say to take other people's tier lists with a grain of salt, no one person knows absolutely everything about every class, and they've played with every class a ton. I think there are a lot of people with really good experience with a lot of classes, and they've played the latest raid with a lot of different classes. But even in that scenario, you're getting a very small sample of the entire player base. And even with these logs, not everybody runs log. This is still a small sample in the grand scheme, but it is still a much larger sample that we've had than anything else. So what I like here is that there are no opinions, and this is just pure raw data. And the thing is, if you do keep up with a lot of what people say about the meta, what's high and low tier, it checks out. When you look at recent tier lists, you're going to see things roughly similar to where you're seeing them now. It's not hot news that D...
Is this low logs data? Yeah. So I can... No. So I'll explain the website, right? I'll explain the website here. So this is the website that they grabbed all the data from. And how it works is... how did I try it out? Logs are already public available for everyone to search and view. If you'd like to upload logs of your own, then head over to the alpha access page and follow the instructions there. So you need to manually, one, they have a specific client for you to download that you need to have. And two, you need to give it access and the ability to upload your logs. So if you don't do that, they don't take your data. Yeah, so basically on this graph, right, the left, all the way to the left is ZTPS, all the way to the right is very high DPS. So I can upload my SE logs, which aren't garbled like my Arcana logs. You can choose the specific ones you want to upload, or you can just let it upload everything. Yeah, you can manually upload and pick and choose good parts. Yep. You see, and that's kind of like one of the arguments, right? People are like, well, but aren't people just going to be uploading all their good logs? And here's my stance on that. It's like, yes, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to upload their good logs, which does skew everything to the right a little bit. But if everybody's doing it, right, then it's just going to be the same anyways, but the graphs are just moved a little bit to the right. You know what I mean? But also the other thing is when they upload their logs, they also include other classes. Like, you know, let's take a look at this. This one's uploaded by a Slayer, right? But like it includes other classes. Actually, this one's probably pretty bad one to show. Let's take a look at this Berserker, right? You see this Berserker's at 4.9 mil, but then you also have this like you know, Gunslinger here at 2.6 mil, right? So their logs aren't just gonna be encompassing themselves who are parsing well. They're also gonna have other people who aren't, you know, doing either average or not as well. So you have this one, Kenneth New.github.io. I can link this in the chat. Yeah. Oh, Bacon already got it. Damn, you're fast, Bacon. Holy. But yeah, this is the website where they have all the logs. Or the aggregated graphs. Yeah, it's not just Gargledees. It's got everything. It's got Gargledees, it's got Sonavel, it got Hanu, you got some Voldees. It doesn't include stuff before. Actually, oh, they added like a Khan in here too. And they have like, oh, Kaya's as well. Yeah, they have everything basically. Holy. They updated this quite a bit since, but you know, some of these have like less parses, right? Like Inferno Clown, things like that.
EB, Soul Eater, Reaper, those are really good classes. Meanwhile, classes like Pistoleer have a very low ceiling. Meanwhile, CO is pretty to spare in most fights, but in the fights that it does good, it's fucking jacked. But I think in general, these actually line up decently well with a lot of tier lists, and even with that KR damage list. Then you can also see how the difficulty of the raids kind of affect damage as well. Because if we look at Volt as normal, Barrage is suddenly up there on top because they're able to just sit in their wheelchair all the time. Now the white lines, the ranges, now there is quite a bit of difference between them, and I think there's a lot of good reason because of that. Because again, you gotta remember, this is only separating them by what engraving they play, and also the item level. Gear, synergy, support diff, those are very big things. And another thing that goes really unconsidered, which I might talk about this more in another video eventually, is the length of the fight. Some classes perform better in short fights and some perform better in long fights. And you can kind of take the range and outliers as similar to a topic I've talked about before, which is the floor and ceilings of classes. And a lot of these classes that are perceived as strong have a very big range. And by design, that's not really a bad thing because if you consider risk and reward. But since that is not consistent across the board, I still don't think that's by design, and they just kind of happen to be this way. Now, they actually do have...
And I think that's something that a lot of people talk about, right? And it's a topic that's very important. When their class has a big range like this, right? It means that the class itself has a very high ceiling, but also a low floor. And really depends on, like, people's, like, I guess, there's a lot of, like, self-expression that goes on in the class and a lot of like skill that goes into how much damage it does. So I think that's always like a topic of conversation. Should classes that are harder to play be stronger than those classes that are easier to play, right? Should classes that have a high a very high floor be weaker than the classes that have very low floors? Yeah, buff Gunslinger. I mean, I also think that Gunslinger does need to take another look at. I think Gunslinger definitely needs a little bit of love, But at the same time, I don't think gunslingers necessarily do like terrible, right? It's like right in the middle, right? About average. What is this one here? Gate 2. Where's gunslinger here? Peacemaker, above average. Peacemaker, a little bit below average here. It's like an average class, you know? It's an average class. But yeah, I think that because of the difficulty of Gunslinger, you know, there might be an argument that it should be a top tier class.
But since that is not consistent across the board, I still don't think that's by design, and they just kind of happen to be this way. Now, they actually do have hell mode data, which I think is really interesting to look at in contrast. With hell mode data, we are getting rid of all the variants when it comes to gearing. There's still going to be a variance as far as party synergy goes, and along with support diff. But in the grand scheme of Lost Ark, hell mode is a very niche community because it doesn't really benefit people that much. It's people who do it for the challenge. These are people who are much more serious about things, or people who just want to buy and sell roses. But with this data, you are getting rid of the gear gap, and then also you are greatly reducing the skill gap, or more accurately, the skill variance.
Well, Princess Maker, no damage.
Sweating out every run, every attempt, trying to just pump the best they can. And when you're looking over this, it does kind of reflect that as well. The range is smaller and you don't really see that many outliers. But again, there is less of a sample size to go off. But even then, like classes that have over 1,000 parses.
Damn, look at Sura. The king of hell mode. The king of hell mode. By a good margin too. Like look at the jump right there. Holy.
Something like that. There still aren't that many outliers. Which we should probably talk about those outliers now. Let's be honest now, we have a lot of fucking goblins in this game. Main character syndrome off the fucking charts. These are the people who look at these lists. They look at they see that dot all the way off like 3 screens away, like a Marth grab in Melee, and they're like,
saw CO. Look, you saw PS above Emperor. Let's see. Let's take a look at these, right? So, perfect suppression. I mean, this is hell mode, right? And it's gonna be, I think hell mode. PS is probably just more consistent than Emperor, maybe. Also, it doesn't help that the data set that we have for PS is so much lower than Emperor. Oh wow, there's a lot of Emperor players who parse. That's actually crazy. That's actually crazy. Nice edge. Like some of these are gonna have a lot more and a lot. There's like, you know, we have one CO. You know, this guy who's parsing for CO might just be like the craziest CO player in the world, and that's why his parse is crazy, right? Or that's why it's so high up there. So you know, there's a lot of factors that we need to consider in here that aren't like just the numbers themselves. Is Infernal Parse good because Agir is normalized? Asura is so good. Yeah, Asura is very good. And the reason why I wouldn't say Infernal Parses are good per se, it's because there's other factors that go into Inferno, right? In Inferno, you don't have everything. You don't have like a 5x3x1, for example. You don't have elixirs. You don't have all these things that could make your class a lot better than what it is without that stuff. So infernal parses are not necessarily better than normal parses. It's just a different type of parse. And the thing is, like, it's equalized parse, right? So it's like it in many ways is like a baseline when you're comparing two classes, right? You're not going to be comparing like a 1630 with a juiced out weapon with like a 1620 with like, you know, barely anything, right? You're comparing apples to apples, which is why a lot of times infernal parses are better comparisons between the classes. But at the same time, I do think that there is some kind of bias with Inferno too, because some classes really get enabled. They really get enabled by like level 10 cooldowns, for example. Like, for example, Lunar Reaper. Lunar Reaper is right here at 9. But the thing is, if you go into this data over here, you'll see Lunar Reaper is very high on a lot of these charts. And partly, largely in part, I think because they're very much enabled by those level 9, level 10 damage gems, which they don't, or not damage, cooldown gems, which they don't get here. So some classes do get an advantage in Hell over others still. Mostly Sura Braille parses are GL plus Bard pocketed him, take everything in Braille. And I think that's why, like, the Hell stats are, again, also going to be sometimes not the best comparisons. Because Hell runs are almost always pre-created statics. Or a lot of times are pre-created statics. They're runs where people are playing, like, the ideal classes and the ideal scenarios to make certain classes perform better than others. So that's why, again, it's another reason why this is just a different set of data. It's not that it's better or worse, it's just different. You're looking at different things.
Let's be honest now, we have a lot of fucking goblins in this game. Main character syndrome off the fucking charts. These are the people who look at these lists. They look at they see that dot all the way off, like 3 screens away, like a Marth grab in Melee, and they're like, yeah, I can be that guy. That's me right there. They're called an outlier for a reason. You're probably not that guy. And I'm not saying this to like demotivate people and say that, you know, don't even try. I'm saying this because a lot of people have to get off their high horse and actually be realistic. And to become a great player is going to be a process. It's not something that you are just naturally just the greatest at. How I've learned to really accept and understand tier list really comes from my experience with fighting games. It's a much more simple environment there where it's just player ceiling and character ceiling. People love to blame their loss on the character itself because they claim that they're hitting the ceiling on the character and they need to upgrade to a better character because the character is holding them back. But chances are their game knowledge isn't that great, their execution might not be off, they might be eating the same mix-ups all the time over and over and over. A character might have a way to cheese out of one of those things, but it's not going to fix you as a player. Which loops back to the start of the video where I said that there is a time where tier lists do matter and tiers do matter, and it's when players are at the same skill level and the character is actually going to make the difference. But there are caveats to all these types of arguments, as in fighting games, playing a low tier gives you an advantage to some degree as you're playing a character not many people play generally, and so people don't know the matchup that well, they don't know the frame data that well, and they have a harder time fighting you as opposed to something that is in the meta. But now I'm kind of ranting too much about fighting games. But there is also an argument that there is a value in tier list when it comes to if there was a tier list on how easy it is to get to the ceiling. But to a degree, we can kind of see that now if we look at the visualization and see the ranges. Now, obviously, yes, there are going to be some limitations, like some classes literally just can't do that much damage because of what you see in Trixion, which they can do on their best situation. They can only hit a certain amount of damage. That is absolutely true. But for a lot of people, that's just not really going to matter. And you have to remember, this is a live.
I just think that this is like, I don't know. This tier list is very weird. I don't think that this tier list is just, I don't think there's any value in this tier list for some reason. It is, yes, like you can see like the ceiling of the different classes, which is interesting. And some would say like, oh, you know, if you can hit the ceiling of your classes, these classes are the best classes in the game to do it with. But it's like nobody's hitting the ceiling, right? I think nobody's ever going to get to these ceilings right here. And like, I don't know, like fights just don't work like Trixion in this sense. Because like you're never going to have a situation where you're always just going to be 100% uptime on the boss, even if you don't have to think about positionals. There's like bosses phasing. There's bosses, you know, going invincible, things like that, where a class like this would be doing crazier numbers on like Surge, for example. A class like this, which, you know, again, with big bursts, big cooldowns, will be performing better than on Trixion. At least that's what I feel. I parse 20% lower on Empress. How the fuck am I supposed to parse it higher than Emperor? I don't get it. I mean, I also think that, like, again, with certain classes, it's just like depends on the fight, right? There are certain classes, there are certain fights where Emperor is going to be better than Empress. There's going to be certain fights that Empress is better than Emperor. And that's kind of like, and this is again why I feel like this data is just not very, or like this tier list is just not very useful. Like, again, I think like the craziest and most egregious thing is the fact that enhanced weapon deadeye is here. Like, if you're looking at this as purely as a tier list, right? The fact that enhanced weapon deadeye here is actually a crime. I think enhanced weapon deadeye is like A tier, to be honest, in my opinion. When it comes to like damage output in a raid, I kind of wished that this tier list didn't exist in many ways, because there are definitely gonna be a lot of people who look at this list and like, oh wow, my class sucks, right? But the thing is, I think like, while people talk about ceilings on like a normal tier list, right? when they place classes on a tier list and they're like, oh, the ceiling of this class is higher than this one. I think like, and many times those people are thinking about ceilings, not even like Trixion ceilings. They're thinking about average raid ceilings. And like this one is purely Trixion ceilings, which certain classes, again, do. While Trixion is a stationary dummy, there are still certain classes that do better than Trixion than other classes. And in an actual raid, their DPS output might be similar. And it's not even just because of positionals. It's just because of how the raids work. How, like, you know, raids phase. How bosses phase and go damage reduction. Like, and DR and things like that. Like, if there wasn't DR and, like, you know, phasing, I'm sure our normal tier list would probably look more similar to this. But the fact that there is damage reduction, the fact that there is phasing, makes our tier list much different than this.
Is absolutely true, but for a lot of people that's just not really going to matter. And you have to remember, this is a live service game that's getting constantly patched, updated, and getting new raids. Character balance patches alone are going to change a huge part of the game, and they are trying to balance patch more often, and on top of it, there's also going to be new raids. Because something I haven't talked about yet is, if we look at this visualization, we can see that these classes definitely perform very different depending on the fight itself. Baldur's Gate 2, Hanumatan, like how these affect how you play your character greatly changes how these tier lists work. Movement on bosses, you know, how fast they move, is going to be a big factor of it. As tier 3 goes on, they had to keep on making the game harder, and one of the things they keep on doing is kind of making the bosses move transition, having more patterns, more constant patterns, and this drastically changes how DPS interact with the fight. When Igniter was kind of at its peak to being talked about as like the greatest class in the game out there with Surge, a big content in the game at that time was Clown. This is a fight where he didn't really move around too much, and he had a lot of long patterns. He had a couple staggers onto it. Very big windows for somebody to just drop all their damage. Or in this case of the sorcerers, they are able to drop their double meatball perfectly fine many times in the fight and just push it up to the next phase. Now there are fights like Kyango G1 where that doesn't really happen. There's not too many times where you can just easily get all your damage windows in all the time. You'd rather just kind of jump off at that point.
And here's something that's actually coming in my video tomorrow. And I'm going to show you guys this, but as I was actually watching Tofu's stream today, as a sneak peek. But this is going to be a topic that I talk about in my video tomorrow.
All our endgame raids in Korea now is Trixion dummy, right? There's a Behemoth is a Trixion dummy. Echidna is basically a Trixion dummy too. Daemine is also technically a Trixion dummy. Not exactly, but like Daemine lets you hit the boss constantly for a very long time.
See, so he's what Jukwol was saying, like, is our NA raids are not like that, right? With like Kyango, with bosses like, you know, Voldis, right? Those things, those bosses are moving around all the time and, like, you know, making it really hard for people who are using slower classes or like harder hitting hits. But when we get into KR meta, it's kind of back into this like more stationary boss that lets you hit them a lot. So a lot of the classes that are, you know, seen as harder to play like a Sork right now actually get a lot better in when we get into that meta. So it's going to be changing very soon.
And with that, I think I've pretty much covered everything I kind of wanted to talk about in this video. To sum it up, I think this data is really good. It helps you really show a realistic showing of the classes and how they're performing. It also gives a little insight on how they're balancing things a little bit to some degree. Like, people outcry about Gunslinger all the time and how it's doing low damage, but Peacemaker is never really at the bottom end of a lot of these things. They're pretty middle. But it also makes you wonder why some of these classes at the way bottom are not anywhere else. But maybe that's a little despair for me since I really love Pistolier. But I really just wanted to talk about all this information and also just talk about how it should affect you and how you should take it, in my opinion. I still firmly believe that you should pick characters and classes that fit your playstyle and that you enjoy playing before a tier list is even a thing. If you work hard enough at it, you play the class and you really enjoy it, you might become the outlier that somebody else looks at and is like, hey, I can be that guy too.
Alrighty, that's the end of the video. It was a good video, as always. Mr. Jukwol always puts out good videos, so y'all, if you haven't subscribed to him, you should.